Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate you joining us for today's webinar, Moving Forward, a Guide to Climate Action for People of Faith, being hosted by the American Baptist Churches USA in partnership with Blessed Tomorrow and the Creation Justice Network. We're so glad you're able to join us. I think we have people really joining us from all over the country, and we appreciate your time. And I think we're just gonna Yep, we've got folks joining as we speak, so that's great. We'll go ahead and get started. So just a couple of housekeeping points before I turn it over to some of the hosts of our call. This call is being recorded, and we will be sharing the link out to everyone who registered and then further out to the network afterwards. Also, the chat function is the best way for you to communicate your questions throughout the call. So all lines are muted, but you should see in your GoToWebinar control panel the option to chat. Please chat your questions throughout the call. We have dedicated Q&A time, but we will be monitoring those questions and trying to address them as we go if it's appropriate to do so. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the Q&A time at the end. So keep those questions coming. So my name is Annie Feck-Cruz. I am the director of Blessed Tomorrow, which is a program of Picot America, and we are an ecumenical partner with ABCUSA, helping to support the wonderful care of creation programming and work that the church is doing in support of all of you and the work that you're doing in your local communities and your congregations and even around the country. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Don Eng to get us started, and you'll hear from me later in the call. But Don, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. I have been asked to open our session with an opening prayer. So let us pray together. Greater God, we are amazed over the beauty you created in the world and are thankful to be co-creators in your creation. Lord, forgive us when we have failed to protect and care for creation. Lead us to strive for justice for both the environment and humankind. And as our ABC logo suggests, we affirm our faith in Jesus Christ, who have come, is coming, and will come to save the whole world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. You see in front of you a list of agenda items that we will be going through during this 1 hour session. We will take a look at why we care as American Baptists in the area of creation justice. There'll be a video shown that will help introduce this topic as a denomination. Annie has already mentioned about the Blessed Tomorrow's guide that she will go through, and then also proceed to help us to understand a little bit more about what climate change is all about. But even more significant is that by introducing to you the Moving Forward guide that you'll see on the screen will be ways of what we can do together, as well as local churches and you as individuals in your church as well as in your communities. And then following that, before we end, we will challenge you to explore what next steps might be. And so we're very excited that you have come on this webinar, and we hope that this will be a time that we could talk together. So I have the honor to introduce who we are. Annie has already introduced herself as the director of Blessed Tomorrow, which is the faith community project for Picot America. I've already mentioned who I am, and I hope that our communication as American Baptists will continue. But I'm also happy to introduce the Reverend Rebecca Driscoll. She is the new Minister for Creation Justice in our denomination. We are so delighted to not only have Blessed Tomorrow with Picot America, but now we have a staff person by the name of Rebecca Driscoll, who's on this seminar, and she will focus much of her time as a staff person in this whole area of creation justice that's not only facing our faith communities, but also our world. So without further delay, I'm going to have Annie advance our slide, and Rebecca is going to say something about our video.
Great, thanks Don for the introduction. Hello everyone, it's great to be with you today. So thinking about the Creation Justice Network, it was established in 2016 as a response that we know it's important for us to care for creation. We know we're called by Christ to care for our neighbors, and our neighbors include the animal and plant life in our world. And when I think about creation justice and how to take action in my faith, I'm also often reminded of the Lord's Prayer, the line that says, on earth as it is in heaven, and caring for creation, protecting creation, caring for a healthy ecosystem is one way that we can put forth effort and put our faith into action in creating little bits or glimpses of heaven on earth. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to the Creation Justice Network's short video.
Great. Here, I'll press play, and hopefully we all can hear the audio. Hang on just a second.
Thanks, Annie.
Choices impact our lives. As American Baptists, our most powerful choice is to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and to follow in his way. We testify to that choice when we are baptized. Our commitment to the way of Jesus drives us to make choices to transform communities and the world for the better.
American Baptists serve as the hands and feet of Christ. We are disciples of Jesus Christ, and we seek to honor God in the decisions we make every day. We minister to the poor and help restore communities devastated by natural disasters. We welcome immigrants and refugees into our communities. There is power in our diversity. We promote responsible stewardship of God's creation, and we invite people into a deeper spiritual life. In the book of Genesis, God creates everything and calling it very good. God called us to care for this creation. We answer this call. We choose responsibility. So now we call upon our sisters and brothers from congregations across the country. It's time to come together.
God's creation is beautiful and bountiful, but now its beauty and abundance is being threatened. Pollution and destruction of the natural world is changing the climate. These threats harm all life, including our children, families, and communities. We see increases in asthma and allergies, communities destroyed by disasters, rising property insurance, and damage to our crops. And our children, seniors, and communities of color suffer the most. Caring for creation is to do justice. This is why in 2016, ABC formed the American Baptist Creation Justice Network. If we really care about God's creation, if we really care about our children's future, and the least of these Christ's brothers and sisters, we must make a choice now. As American Baptists, we can make a difference. We can stop the pollution that is damaging the climate. We can become more efficient in our use of energy. We can use clean, renewable energy and use it wisely. When we make this choice, it is powerful, it is fulfilling, and it is pleasing to God.
When you make this choice, you exercise your calling to love God and to love your neighbor, to be a caretaker of God's creation. American Baptist Churches USA, our Creation Justice Network, and Blessed Tomorrow are coming together to help guide and support your choice to walk with Christ as protectors of God's creation. We invite you to become a Creation Justice congregation. Visit abcusa.org and blesstomorrow.org to find helpful tools to guide your congregation. Join us in loving and protecting our common home.
Wonderful. And I'll just reiterate that this can be found on the ABCUSA website, ABCUSA /creation-justice, and you can watch it there as well. So I'll toggle back over to our slide presentation and go back to that. Great. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Can you go to the next slide, please, Amy? Perfect. So as we extend this invitation to you to participate in the Creation Justice Network's work and also the Creation Justice Congregations Initiative, we have lots of resources available digitally on our website for you to peruse, things like books or articles and blogs that we have found as a Creation Justice Network have been helpful for us, and we hope might also be helpful for you. As part of my new position as the ABC Minister for Creation Justice, we'll be adding more digital resources and material. We'll also have newsletters that go out. We will also be doing more regional events and reaching out to the regions and the local congregations a little bit more to make these things more accessible to you as you start contemplating what it might be like to engage with creation care in your local context, or how to continue if you've already begun thinking about what creation justice might look like for you in your context. And so we're really excited the new things that are happening on our website and digitally and in our conversations in our communities. This is something that we as American Baptists have a long legacy of. There was a gentleman named Gifford Pinchot who was one of America's first foresters, and his religious life and his faith very heavily influenced his passion to protect American forests and the undeveloped lands. And one of the gentlemen in his faith life that really influenced him was the Baptist pastor, Walter Rauschenbusch. And so we come from a long legacy of people who are devoted and passionate about creation justice, and we are excited to continue moving forward in that direction. So as we do that, we are partnering, as you know, with Blessed Tomorrow, and we're excited to have Annie with us today to go through some of the resources that they have and that they are going to share with us in this partnership. So Annie, I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, and it is such a pleasure to be here with you all today. And we have really, truly enjoyed the partnership that we have with the American Baptist Church and all of the wonderful folks that you are meeting here on the webinar if you don't already know them. So one thing to understand is that we are the faith program for a larger organization called Picot America. So who are we and what do we do? We are an organization that is dedicated, it's a 501c3 nonprofit that's dedicated to helping to build leadership on the issue of caring for creation and specifically climate change. And we're working in a variety of different sectors. We have programs for the faith sector, the one that I manage, Blessed Tomorrow. We also have a program for the health sector. So if you or someone you know is a health professional, a doctor, a nurse, a public health practitioner, we have our Climate for Health program that has a lot of wonderful resources as well for folks in that sector. And we're working with local governments and local communities, so mayors and city council members, urban sustainability directors, folks in communities who are working on this issue. We also provide a whole host of tools and resources for them. And so I'll talk a little bit about Blessed Tomorrow. So again, we're doing things like helping denominations think about how to lead more visibly on this issue, whether it's passing resolutions at the national level, whether it's developing training for clergy and lay leaders, research. We survey a lot of our partner membership to know, where are they on the issue of caring for creation and specifically climate change? What do we need to know about about the audience as we're preparing and developing tools and resources specifically for you. And one of the tools that we've been able to develop is this new guide, this new congregational toolkit called the Moving Forward Guide, and we'll dive into the content here in just a minute. But we partnered with a lot of our partners. So we have a relationship with ABCUSA, but we also have partnerships with many other organizations you may be familiar with. So some of the larger denominations here in the US, other ecumenical partners of yours. We work with the Jewish and the Muslim community as well. And we had folks input and participation in the development of this guide, trying to make sure that it was something that could meet the needs of everyone. And so what is the purpose of the guide, and why do we think it's valuable to sit here and talk to you all today about it and demonstrate it for you? It's really meant to be a high-level toolkit that you might think reference and use when you're implementing creation care programming within a congregation. So we're talking about, what is the moral imperative, and how does climate change specifically connect to our existing faith values and priorities as a congregation and even as a denomination? What are things that we can do? How do we move towards a more clean and healthy energy system? How do we think about ways that we can reduce energy use and prepare for climate change? And how might we engage with others, whether it's our friends and family, our community, our congregation, or maybe even policymakers at a local, state, or national level? And so the guide is intended to walk you through all of these pieces. Again, you can find the guide on the ABCUSA /Creation Justice website. So you can reference that later after the call if you haven't checked it out already. So what is it that we need to know? Many of you on the call, this might be an issue that you're already involved in and pay a lot of attention to, but maybe there are folks on the call for whom this isn't something that you're necessarily that familiar with, but you want to learn more. So we know that climate change is a moral issue because what we see is that the most vulnerable among us are the ones who are most impacted and most at risk. When we think about children, the elderly, already marginalized communities who suffer, are unfortunately those who are least able to respond. And quite frankly, often the ones least likely to have contributed to what we are experiencing due to climate change. But there's good news, right? So we can lead on this issue. We can bring our faith values forward on this issue in a way that cuts through some of the political division that we see around this issue, right? We care for God's creation. We are called to care by God in Genesis, and we are being supported. You are being supported by your denomination with the wonderful tools and programming that we're walking through and that were referenced by Don and Rebecca earlier. And there are things that we can do. We're going to walk through some of those here today, but there's many more. And you're so lucky to have Rebecca joining you to help, provide support and guidance as you think about implementing some of this work, maybe in your own congregation or even your own home. And just reiterating that you're not alone. As I mentioned, there are many different faith traditions who are also involved in this work, who are trying to lead and do work at the local level, but also at the national level. If you've been paying attention to the national news, there were many folks convened in Madrid, Spain for the past 2 weeks by the UN, looking at ways to address climate change and other environmental issues. And the faith sector had a huge contingent there. So leaders from many, many denominations and other traditions here in the US and internationally were convened, praying for leaders, calling on leaders to act, and providing space for discussion and compassion. And the other thing to know is that climate solutions help everyone, right? So there are benefits that we receive and give when we implement climate solutions, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And of course, the transition must be just. So we have to ensure that those who are being impacted by a transition away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner energy sources are not left behind, and also that the benefits that are produced by that kind of transition are equally and equitably distributed among populations here in the US and also around the world. and they require some investment. So sometimes we have solutions that are going to require some upfront investment, but have a really quick and important return on investment over time. And we have to be thinking about that long-term return on investment over time if we're going to be able to see the change we need. So before I dive in, I think we had a question from Dawn or Rebecca here. Do you guys want to share? You may be muted.
I was wondering, is this my question, Annie?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. The question I want to ask you, Annie, is that some of us on the call today may be more familiar with how our climate is changing than others. For example, I'm here in California, and for the past 3 years, we've been facing this horrible wildfires because of drought and then high winds that we have never seen before. And so can you tell us what's happening to the climate, and how does this impact us, the people we love, the people we serve in local churches, our neighbors, both near and far, and then we can extend this to all of creation. So share us what you know about climate change.
That's a really great question and wonderful transition here. So, you know, again, some of you on the call may be familiar with the latest science and you know, the data points that are coming out from some really large international research reports over the last year or two. I always find this graphic really helpful to demonstrate, you know, what is it that we're talking about when we talk about the fact that the climate is changing. You know, I think generally, you know, we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and since the industrial age, we have been pouring huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is warming our planet. But there are other greenhouse gases like methane that's produced from fossil fuel extraction and production, also from the agriculture sector. And you know, there are greenhouse gases produced in a variety of other ways, but the primary sources are from you know, energy use and transportation, and from agriculture. And all of that massive amounts of emissions have just been happening again since the industrial age. But it doesn't matter if I tell you this. Sometimes it's really a picture speaks 1,000 words. And so this here, what you're looking at is ice core data going back 800,000 years. And what we can see here is that, you know, temperature changes here and there, up and down, as we see increases in carbon dioxide levels and other greenhouse gas levels. And these correspond to things like warm periods or even ice ages over time. But when you get to that very end of this chart and we look at where we are with carbon dioxide concentration, and I apologize, the temperature line got cut off here, but with temperature as well, it spikes just the same way. We can see there's an incredible correlation in that this number is much higher than it's really ever been, even in the past 800,000 years. And when we project out what we expect to see mid-century, just this century, mid-century, again, it's double, triple the amount that we've ever seen, again, in the past 800,000 years. So it's a pretty dramatic visual here. And this is why scientists are concerned. And this is why, you know, our wonderful youth like Greta Thunberg are raising the alarm bells, because this is something we haven't seen before, and something that's pretty dramatic. But it's not just, you know, what is the science and what does the data tell us? It's also, you know, what does this mean for us? One of the things that we find at Blessed Tomorrow is that individuals don't always understand exactly how climate change is impacting them directly. And it's important to understand that it impacts not just us personally, people we know, maybe people who live far away from us, even in other parts of the world, but it impacts the ministry areas and the priorities that we already have as people of faith. So maybe your congregation or the denomination itself has been very invested in a variety of these different issues that you see on your screen. You know, for example, if we care about water, We care about climate change because climate change is going to directly impacting access to water, creating additional droughts, more severe and intense weather patterns. This is the most important thing to understand about climate change, is that it increases the frequency and the intensity of severe weather. We're seeing increases in waterborne disease, and of course with flooding brings on a whole host of concerns for humans and our animal friends and other creatures. If you care about hunger, you care about climate change. We've actually seen, and there's studies that show that the nutritional value of food can decrease with rising CO2 levels. So it's not just that drought and flood affect the growing patterns and ability to produce food, but it's also the fact that the food may not actually contain as much nutrition as it used to. We care about migration and immigration. We care about climate change. We're already seeing climate refugees here in 2019, almost 2020, and we expect this to continue to increase and cause, concern and conflict in those areas where people are migrating to and from. And speaking of, if you care about peace, if you care about conflict, then you also have to care about climate change. We're seeing, a great example. There are lots of sources who think that some of the impacts from the Syrian conflict were because people were moving away from climate-ravaged areas into other places where there had been traditional interactions between different communities that caused additional strife. So this is something that we're seeing more and more of, and we can expect to continue to see that to increase. We care about poverty. We care about climate change. We can expect unemployment to increase in places that are impacted by these natural disasters that, again, are more frequent and more intense. And certainly, if we care about racism, and especially the long history of environmental racism in this country, we care about climate change. Marginalized communities are already at a higher risk for the adverse effects of climate change. Climate change and the ability to respond to it is often dependent on someone's means. And if there's been historical racism that makes it difficult for folks to obtain those means, then they're going to be less likely to respond, and it creates a growing gap. If we care about gender equity, we care about climate change. So we know that women are at a specific risk for some of the impacts of climate change, especially when we think about reproductive health. There's some studies that are showing that pollution crosses the placental barrier, and as pollution increases, the impacts to fetal development will continue to be exacerbated. And then if you combine some of these issues of, racial issues and also gender issues, we can see, for example, African American women have some of the highest rates of asthma currently. So what happens if we see increased asthma due to climate change? These numbers are going to continue to grow. And if we care about intergenerational justice, then we care about climate change. We know that children are greatly impacted by the effects of climate change. And quite frankly, those generations are the ones who are going to get stuck with having to deal with this. Some of us are ending our careers and moving on into retirement, but it's really our youth who are going to have to face the challenges of solving these problems through policies and actions within our government. And of course, if we care about health, we care about climate change. There's a whole variety. We actually have a 4-hour training on the health impacts of climate change. And we have several reports, again, on our Climate for Health website if you'd like to learn more. But climate impacts health. The American Public Health Association last year named the year of climate for their entire organization, and specifically focused on all of these different impacts. And these are happening today, and we expect them to become worse over time. And certainly we know that climate change impacts people differently. So depending on where you live, you're going to see different impacts, or you are seeing different impacts. The guide actually walks through at a high level a variety of different regions of the United States. Just to highlight a few here, if you're in the Northeast, you can expect increase in extreme weather events. Maybe you're already seeing that. Of course, sea level rise is a concern. And we expect these things to impact farming, tourism, forestry, for example. But if you're in the Northwest, while some of these things remain the same, there are other issues to deal with. So we're seeing obviously an increase in intensity and frequency of wildfire, increase in intensity and frequency of heat waves. And because of the tourism industry, national park systems, et cetera, there's impacts to things like tourism and recreation. And again, this varies throughout the entire country. So it's a great thing to go to the guide and check out what you might be able to expect. So before I transition to the next slide, Rebecca, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, and so Annie, thinking about all the different impacts of climate change, things that we have been seeing and things that we haven't quite seen yet, but are expecting, anticipating, are there ways that we can put our faith into action in response to the impacts that we're seeing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is the good news. I think it can get really heavy when we talk about some of these impacts and maybe even feel overwhelming or insurmountable. But I just want to remind everyone, God is with us. God is with us, and we have so much to be thankful for. God did create a beautiful and good creation, and it is something I do every morning. I sit and just really express gratitude to God for what we have, and really the calling that we've had that's been placed on our hearts to steward this creation. And so pray for guidance. It's important for us to find support. We're not alone in this work, as I mentioned, but not everyone is necessarily comfortable or confident in talking about it. And so reach out and find individuals either in your community, your family, or especially your congregation that maybe you can plan and talk to. And if you can do that, you can assemble a team. And I know that we already have in the American Baptist Church's Creation Justice Network many congregations who have assembled a green team or become a Creation Justice congregation. And that's a great way to be able to come together and really plan together and implement work together. And you can use the Moving Forward Guide as a guide to develop those kinds of plans. And again, Rebecca mentioned that there are other tools and resources on the website and that she'll be developing for you. And we encourage you to start with easy, visible changes. So things that are easy, that are low cost, but that also are visible so that you're really bearing witness to those who are interacting with you or interacting with your congregation, and hopefully growing that group, that support group, that team who are willing and able to help you with this work. And we know that solutions and taking action can save money. Sometimes that alone is a helpful motivator for a congregation, for a church council to take action. But as you're experiencing those savings, it's important to roll them forward and to reinvest them into this work long term. Something else we encourage folks to do is to think about how you can make a more public commitment. So if the congregation is supporting this work, you've started to work on it, and you've had some visible changes, can you reach out to others in your community, other congregations nearby, and say, we are a congregation, we are a Creation Justice congregation, we're making a commitment to this work, to this calling, and we want to invite you to join us, come learn what we're doing, and maybe it's something that you yourself can undertake. And so when we go into specifics, the guide walks through three key areas. It's these three key areas: stewardship. So thinking about the technical term you hear in the environmental world a lot is mitigation. This is really about reducing our energy use and moving towards clean energy sources. The second is refuge. So thinking about how we can prepare and adapt for climate change. It's happening now, it's going to continue to happen. What can we be doing to create refuge in our community, in our congregation for people? And then bearing witness. So this is really talking about communicating and advocating. So when we talk about mitigation, there are some simple things that you can do, and the guide will walk you through all of this. You want to get a baseline for what your current energy use is in your either community or your congregation, your home. Think about how to conserve energy first and foremost in order to save some money, to lower your emissions, but then invest back into additional improvements over time. Maybe even consider investing in renewable energy. There are several American Baptist congregations who have invested in solar panels or geothermal wells or other renewable sources of heat and power. And then as much as you can do, we're going to have to take that plane trip. We're going to have to, keep our car. Maybe it's not time for us to replace our car and we aren't quite able to think about a fully electric vehicle. There are ways that you can offset your carbon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. We produce, as part of the guide, a roadmap. You don't have to do all of these things in order, but sometimes it's helpful to just have a path. So if you wanted to be bold and ambitious and think about how you, your family, or your congregation might move toward 100% clean energy by 2030, a goal that is talked about in the public spheres a lot, but it is very ambitious, what would that look like? How would you approach that? And again, I just mentioned some of these steps previously, but over time, you can see how this might be something that can be achievable over time. And I want to actually turn it over to Don to talk about the fact that, there are congregations in the ABCUSA network who are already accomplishing some of this work, including a congregation that Don led. So Don, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share a few points about the First Chinese Baptist Church of San Francisco.
Thank you, Annie. When I first was called to First Chinese in San Francisco way back in 1998, as a new pastor, I was very focused on being effective and being pastoral, trying to listen and to get to know this wonderful faith family. And probably the low on my priority list would be installing solar panels on the church roof. But I was blessed with an advocate who was always calling me about what can we do as a faith community. He was a very helpful thorn on the side as a new pastor of this church. And then we also had a member who truly believed in a eco-justice commitment, and he made a major gift. He helped to explore where our utility company as well as our city of San Francisco provided rebates. And we realized that where our church is located, right in the heart of Chinatown, is one of the sunniest neighborhoods that we have, which meant that solar panels would be ideal. So we installed 81 panels, as you can see from a Google map picture of our church. And obviously, we immediately reduced our electricity bill. And in fact, I think we have not paid any electricity since we have installed the panels. In fact, we contribute what we receive through the panels back to our electric company. But the second thing, in addition to, as Annie said, saving money, which all of us in church work wants to do because it helps with raising pledges or not to cover expenses. But our church also became a model for others. In that slide that says what we can do, we invited other churches in Chinatown to come and see our solar panels, climb up to the rooftop and see what it looks like. And just by doing that is a public witness commitment that we've made for not only the community that we live in, but also to other faith traditions. And so that's been one way that we have contributed.
Thanks so much, Don. It's just, I think it's so helpful to hear that, there are others who are doing this work now, and there are certainly many examples within the American Baptist Church. So it's not just at Don and the congregation out in San Francisco. There are many others in different parts of the country who have done this work, and I think Rebecca will be a great resource for you to learn more about who those folks are and what they're doing and what you might learn from them. So as I mentioned, the second component of the guide here is talking about creating refuge and thinking about preparing and adapting for climate change. And this is something that I think is a little bit, maybe a step removed from something you may have thought about before, but I think we're all familiar with disaster response, and certainly, the denomination has been active in disaster response. Maybe you yourself or your congregation have responded, have gone to the scene of disasters in the past or contributed towards those efforts. But there are things that we can learn from that and actually apply to preparing and planning and becoming more resilient towards climate change over time. So again, as I mentioned in the guide, all of the regional climate impacts are here, but it might be worth, thinking about, what can we be doing as a congregation to address the longer term impacts of climate change, not just the immediate climate events that might be happening. So you can assemble a team, maybe it's that same team. We walk through in the guide how you can set goals, really assess using these impacts to assess the risks that you might experience wherever you are located, and to develop a plan for how to respond to that. Very similar to something you might think about from a disaster response perspective, to making sure that you're connecting with others in your community who are involved in these kinds of efforts. So your local FEMA office, your city council, or your town council, town leaders, others within the community, or even your own congregation, so they know, what is it that we're going to be doing to help create refuge in the face of climate change in our own congregation. In the guide, we actually have a fictional story that we talk about, although it's something that you could easily see and find in most parts of the country. It's a congregation that's based in Atlanta and identifies that they're going to be seeing additional heat days, high heat days. Now they are experiencing that, and they're going to continue to experience that over time. And so they, as a congregation, decide to become a cooling center, a designated cooling center in their community, really to respond and to think about how they can use the people in their congregation and the facility itself to create refuge for those suffering from those increased high heat days. But there are other examples of this going on right now within the ABCUSA network. And so I'll turn it over to Rebecca to just share a few examples and stories. Rebecca?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. So as you can see, there are lots of different examples of how we as churches and communities of faith and American Baptists are creating spaces where refuge is possible. And so the First Chinese Baptist Church of San Francisco is very busy, and they've also organized beach cleanups. We had also during our Mission Summit Biennial in Virginia Beach this past June, we had a group of youth go out and do some park cleanup as well as some restoration of some buildings that had been affected by hurricanes. And as American Baptists, when we rebuild, many communities are not only just rebuilding structures and communities the way they were, but also trying to adapt the rebuilding so that those communities can be more resilient and prepared in the future. So this can happen in a variety of ways. Congregations can respond by creating green teams and assessing energy use and the building materials that they're using, being more sustainable and conscious about conserving water. Several congregations have thought about what it means to stop using single-use cutlery and paperware for coffee hour and other meetings, or using fair trade coffee. And also planting community gardens. There's a picture that I've come across of a congregation in Providence, Rhode Island, the First Baptist Church of America, that started to grow a community garden, and they have a sign that says, "Come and eat." And so they are inviting the wider community of the city to come and share with them the fruits of their garden, and thinking about the ways that changing environment might also change the way that we eat is really important, and another way that we can engage with our environment and its health and safety.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So I want to make sure we leave a sufficient amount of time for some questions, and just a reminder to chat your questions as you have them in the chat function. We've gotten a few already, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. So I'm going to quickly go through here our final section of the guide, which is really talking about bearing witness. And I know this is just an intrinsic part of the American Baptist tradition. And this is not just, again, thinking about advocacy as a spectrum, right? So there are ways that we can learn how to communicate on this issue. There are ways that we can communicate again, just to friends and family within our congregations, or even to policymakers and decision makers, folks in the business community who really hold power in actually making big change. And I just want to remind you all that as faith leaders, as clergy and lay leaders on the call, you are trusted messengers. Our own research continues to demonstrate that people of faith are identified as a more trusted individual in a community than many other professions. And policymakers, decision makers want to hear from the constituents, and they really, really value the faith voice. We hear it all the time here in Washington, D.C., where Blessed Tomorrow is based, but certainly is the case at the local and state level as well. And I think an important statistic here that we found in some recent research that we did at Picot America is that while 73% of Americans express being directly concerned about climate change, that's the reported number, it's 73%, which may be higher than you expected. But when those same people are asked, do you think others are concerned? We're only seeing 57% say yes. And so there's a gap here, and there's an invitation for us to extend to those who care and maybe are concerned about naming it, about saying it, about talking about it. We as people of faith can really extend that invitation with compassion. And again, you are called into this work, this public witness work. So when I mentioned the spectrum of advocacy, here are some examples. Again, you may be able to start at any point on this spectrum, but maybe you're comfortable and you're ready to go out and speak with your policymakers, or even a more bolder witness, protest or civil disobedience. But maybe you're just starting at the beginning and you really just want to understand, how can I talk about this issue with my father-in-law over the Christmas holidays without it becoming a huge ordeal? And this is where we are really excited to be able to offer a wonderful resource, a complimentary resource to the Moving Forward Guide, called our Let's Talk Faith and Climate Guide. And this is also on the ABCUSA Creation Justice website. It's a whole training as well as a guide about how you can talk about this issue, really starting with the individual and their priorities and existing values. So as I walked through all of those ministry areas that are going to be directly impacted by climate change, maybe someone cares deeply about their grandchildren and the well-being and their health and well-being over time. And so you can start a conversation there. Don't even talk about climate change off the bat. Just build some rapport and really become climate literate. So make sure you understand the issue in a way, at least in a baseline way, that you feel confident talking about it. And again, the Let's Talk Faith and Climate Guide is a resource for you. And then you can start relating it to faith, really understand those theological groundings that Don and Rebecca talked about earlier in the webinar here, so that you can reference scripture and reference Jesus's teachings, because that's, if you're connecting with a person of faith, those are things that they already hold as existing values. And then, of course, thinking about elevating your voice within your own faith community. I mentioned speaking to policymakers. Maybe you are willing and comfortable to write an op-ed in your local newspaper, and even further along. So there's a whole spectrum to get involved. The guide walks you through ways that you can do this in your congregation, in your community, and with policymakers. We provide information on how to find out who your policymakers are, again, at the local, state, or federal level. And we also reference the fact that some people are called into this bolder witness. Not everyone's going to be comfortable doing it, but there are those who are called into it, and that is a very important and valid calling if you are so called. So I just want to turn it back over to Rebecca and Don, if there are any examples that you wanted to share for folks on the call.
So this is Don here. When Annie mentioned about doing something that is easy and visible so that your congregation can begin and growing to feel more confident in doing even more improvements in reducing our carbon footprint. At First Chinese, when we did a renovation, we installed industrial dishwasher, which meant that rather than to use paper or styrofoam plates, we had a donation of some plates and cups and other things from from a restaurant that was going out of business. And so every Sunday now, we serve breakfast and we use real dishes and real mugs and cups. And I just know that this is a way of modeling for our young people and the children that if we can do this at church, then they may even begin to wonder if they're not using real dishes at home and begin to challenge their own parents that this is a much more sustainable habit that we can all get into. And I think that reinforces the phrase of do what I do, not what I say, and to live out our commitment to climate change, being good stewards of saving and protecting God's world by becoming advocates in that way.
Thanks so much, Don. So just to, again, make sure we leave some time for questions. So there are some great resources for advocacy that you can consider. And again, these are all available and referenced on the ABCUSA website. Just to talk through some next steps before I know Rebecca has a specific call to action. Connect with ABCUSA's Creation Justice Network and the work that Rebecca's doing. Consider becoming a climate justice congregation, which she's going to walk you through in just a moment. Review that Let's Talk Faith and Climate guide that I just mentioned. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful, especially for pastors and other leaders, lay leaders who are called to speak with others on this topic and bring them into, invite them into the work. You can join our newsletter. We are also going to be partnering with ABCUSA to launch a new training program called the Climate Ambassador Training. It looks like we might be able to offer an in-person option at the end of April, early May, so stay tuned for that. But this is a way for you to get trained in much more depth on all of this and to become prepared to talk about it in your communities and again, invite others to join you. So that might be something that would be of interest. And if you haven't started already, what can you be doing now? Things like Dawn just mentioned, ways that you can be communicating already. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Rebecca to extend a specific invitation. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Great, thanks, Annie. So as I mentioned earlier, and as was mentioned in the video that we showed at the beginning of this presentation, the Creation Justice Network has started their Creation Justice Congregations Initiative. And so through this initiative, our pamphlet brochure for that initiative is now on your screen. We have created a 3-stage program for congregations to engage in. So congregations, if you are in a faith community that hasn't started thinking about creation justice or creation care yet, there's an entry level for you. And if you as a congregation have been dialoguing about this for a while or have even taken steps, maybe strong committed steps towards creation justice, there's an entry level for you. And so we wanted to make sure that through our 3 stages, we found ways that congregations can really tailor creation justice and creation care for their specific setting. And so there's these 3 stages, and it can start really simple, like maybe you think about how to compost or recycle or print double-sided, and then maybe there's a sermon series about creation care, or a vacation Bible school. The First Baptist Church of Needham, Massachusetts has created a really great vacation Bible school model. And then you can continue on from there to do more and bigger commitments like buying fair trade coffee, or like Don mentioned at his church where they decided to use all ceramic dishes and have a dishwasher. And so there's lots of entry points. And with this Creation Justice Congregations model, we are also going to have mentors. So you can be matched with someone on the steering committee of the Creation Justice Network, and hopefully also someone in your local area, so that you're connected with networks in your community and also the larger ABC family. So we're hoping that this will be an open invitation and a welcoming invitation for everyone to come and participate in creation care in ways that feel comfortable for you and also attainable for you, because we know that sometimes congregation time commitments are tight, and so could this maybe fit into a full schedule that you are already committed to? So we just ask that you think about this and pray about this and ways that you might be able to integrate creation care into your current faith community settings and congregations. And so now I'm going to open it up for questions. If you have questions that you've already sent us or are thinking of new questions at this point and you want to chat them in, that would be great.
Great. So we have several questions that have come forward, so I'll go ahead and pose those. So the first is, what can pastors do with climate deniers in their congregation? And I'll share again, the Let's Talk Faith and Climate Guide, I think would be a really helpful resource to think about and learn about ways to open dialogue with individuals for whom this is not necessarily a priority, where they might have ambivalence, or where, like you mentioned, they may actually be active deniers of the issue. And there are ways to start those conversations. And again, I just mentioned, but rooted in, what is it that they already care about? And is there a way to open a conversation there? I think at any point, there will be times when, it's just not necessarily in our best interest to continue to try to push someone to think differently, but we should always feel that we can be called into opening and extending an invitation for that dialogue. And I think, again, as people of faith, as clergy especially, that is a role that we can play, and a role that you can learn how to play with specific language, guidance, and message building strategies that the guide walks through. So Dawn and Rebecca, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Well, my only comment.
I think what you said was great.
Yeah. Yes. Don here. My only comment is that sometimes we structure that question to be either you believe in climate change or that you don't, and it's. I don't think that's really. I think that kind of question just polarizes any group, and especially a congregation. It seems to me that when I was pastoring the church, we actually never had that question asked, but rather, what does it mean to be a good steward of resources? Just resources in general. I think everyone can understand that we don't want to be wasteful. We don't want to do things that would cost more than what we need to spend or use the kind of resources that we have. And if just with that approach to say that whatever we can do in order to reduce waste, which contributes to a larger carbon footprint here on Earth, it seems like it would be important for us to be part of that. And so, whether it's wasting water or wasting all kinds of like paper, try to save on the use of paper as much as we can. I think it's just a natural way or a common way for us to be good resource people who are committed to protecting our resources.
Great. We have another question here. Are there resources for spiritual, emotional support in dealing what's happening all over the world? It's bringing about despair in the face of all of this. And how can we as leaders and congregations be truthful about the reality of what's happening, but at the same time use language that's hopeful? So I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca, but just a real quick, again, plug for the Moving Forward Guide and the Let's Talk Faith and Climate Guides about that being truthful while quickly pivoting to solutions and benefits, and really helping people understand that there are things that we can be doing to make a difference. So maybe Rebecca or Dawn, what resources for folks who are feeling the weight of this right now?
Yeah, so the Creation Justice Network is working hard on this specific topic because we know that there's social justice fatigue, creation justice fatigue, compassion fatigue, as we work to advocate for creation care, and as we know that that often takes a lot of emotional and spiritual energy. And so we're developing new material. We are posting it online and making it available to everyone. And we are so blessed to have partners like Blessed Tomorrow and other ecumenical and interfaith partners in this work who also have resources available in this area. And there are retreats that are being held that we will definitely reference and have available online and things like that, guides and retreats and reflections and devotionals that can help us really take rest and time and re-energize and recharge and think about ways that we might be able to address the reality of being tired in this work.
Well, that's great to hear, Rebecca. Thanks so much. And just one comment is our last comment here. And again, if you have questions, chat them. We may not be able to get to them today, but we can share them with the team here who maybe can reach out and respond individually. But just a call from someone on the phone who is encouraging us to not use plastic, that they're seeing a lot of plastic waste within the church, and it's something that they are hoping that you and the church itself can call on parishioners and clergy to be thoughtful about. So thanks for that. So I think that's the end of the questions here. Just in summary, I'll turn it over to Rebecca to close us out.
Yeah, so as you can see on this slide, if you have further questions for us in the next few days or weeks, or you chatted us a question that we weren't able to get to this afternoon, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you. I also want to say a quick thanks to Annie and to Dawn for presenting with me today and being our partners in this work. We wish you all a blessed Advent season and Christmas. And I also want to close today with a prayer that was written by Walter Rauschenbusch. So I will quote using his words. It's a redacted version of a prayer that was published in one of his books. So I invite you now to pray with me. Oh God, we thank thee for this universe, our great home. Enlarge within us a sense of fellowship with all the living things, our siblings, to whom you have given this earth as their home in common with us. We remember the shame of the past, that we have exercised high dominion of human beings with ruthless cruelty, so that the voice of the earth, which should have gone up to you in song, has been a groan of travail. May we realize that we do not live for us alone, but for you, and that we love the sweetness, and so do all the creatures that live even as we, and they serve you in their place better than we in ours. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Rebecca. And this concludes the webinar for today. Again, we have recorded this and we'll be sharing a link out shortly. Please encourage others to watch it and share it with your networks. And we thank you today. Farewell, everyone.